Prohibition on soliciting. Recommendation that the City Council adopt a proposed ordinance amending its current regulation of soliciting, panhandling, to include the intersection of Bayfront Parkway and 17th Avenue as locations where activity of soliciting and panhandling is prohibited. All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ms. Myers.
Yes, I don't support this amendment to this ordinance. I think that this ordinance is problematic. I think it has constitutional issues. Our consultant, Mr. Marbut, and our, I believe the recommendations from the Task Force on Human Services recommended that we repeal the so-called four homeless ordinances. I'd also like to point out that I think it's really strange that arterial roads are only those in the CRA district. If you look at District 2 and that uptown area, clearly one of the major arterial roads in the city is Airport and Bayou, the intersections of 9th Avenue and Airport, 9th Avenue and Bayou, 12th Avenue and Bayou. All those are arterial roads, and Davis Highway, and yet the arterial roads that have to do with the 500-foot distance are only in the CRA district, it appears. So I think this ordinance is very problematic, and I see no reason to add another arterial road to this solicitation ordinance. And so I'm not going to support it. As far as it being an intersection where there are a lot of accidents, I would like to remind council, when you see the accident report tonight, or I don't know if it'll be tonight or not, but at the last council meeting, I'm hooked up on my earring here, that the major crash areas in the city are most of them are in District 2. So I don't find that as a valid justification for expanding this solicitation ordinance just to include that intersection. So I won't be supporting it. And I think too that we need to wait until we have our our workshop on the task force recommendations before we start tweaking this ordinance. Thank you. Thank
you, Councilman Baer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to ask a question of the Deputy Chief over there, if I could.
Go ahead.
Hey, Chief, was this not brought to us as a concern from the police department as far as safety there at that intersection? Do you know?
In District 2?
This particular item on that. What I understood was that there had been an identified problem with safety issues at that particular intersection. That's one of the reasons it was requested that we add this.
I believe there have been some concerns expressed. Exactly what they were, I'm not very sure.
Okay. And that would be down there right at like the foot of the bridge is what we're talking about, which...
17. I'm sorry. My understanding is that Chief Simmons made a point that it was one of the top 5 locations, this particular location was.
Okay, so the reason we were doing this is more for public safety then, is the reason I think it was brought forward. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, yes. Thank you.
Okay, I have several cards for this item. First is Sean Brown.
Good evening, mayor and staff. Don't really need those anyway. City councilmen and women. Thank you for your time today. As Mr. President stated, my name is Sean P. Brown. I'm an assistant public defender attorney here in Pensacola, right across the street. And while I don't stand here in front of you representing the public defender's office, I believe that my experience there does give me a particular insight that allows me to speak on this issue. I was a political science major before I became interested in law and decided to pursue my career in that, especially at the public defender's office, representing the indigent people here in Pensacola and the state of Florida. On that note, I've seen further and further movements, not only from this council, but towards our nation as a whole, to criminalize nonviolent conduct when it comes to drug offenses, and particularly in Florida with homelessness. I'd like to point out that this action has resulted in mass incarceration of nonviolent offenders, and currently our jail is stretched to the max. And I invite any of you to join me on my multiple visits every week to see the current condition of it. In addition, we refer to this as a homeless problem, but I remind the council that this is not a homeless problem. These are our neighbors. These are individuals. And I hope that the council looks at them as individuals and not a problem that blights our community, but as residents and members of our community. In addition, in my experience, I've found that the deterrence model is not effective. In addition, enforcement is selective, as we know. And in addition, the practicalities preclude due process in a lot of instances. Just today, I was in first appearances, and a man in which I believe to be not guilty could not, in all honesty, couldn't afford any bond that the judge was willing to give him. And the legal process mandates that he be given a court date to hear any motions, and he was going to get out in enough time where he wasn't even going to have those motions. This man was not guilty and pled to a crime today because he wanted to get out of jail. That's what this is resulting in. It's resulting, while we speak about it in a nice air-conditioned room in front of well-dressed ladies and gentlemen, this results in people having cold steel placed around their wrists and being put into boxes. It's just as simple as that. The deterrence model is ineffective, and most often because the people that are subjected to homelessness often have mental capabilities that preclude them from realizing whether or not they've done anything wrong in the first place. Not that these particular ordinances are morally questionable to begin with. That being said, most homeless are the result of a rather recent economic, financial, and medical situation, and chronic homelessness is not, I don't think, our issue here in Pensacola. And I would advise the council and hope that the council doesn't let the actions of a few bad apples dictate their projection of the entire community here in Pensacola, as I don't think it's fair for any one or two people to be representatives of the entire group, as we've seen here recently in the news. In addition, I would like to be honest in saying that I've studied this for 2 years in school and another 3 years in law school, and I don't know what the solutions are. But I know that Pensacola here is very fortunate in having a very strong contingent of people that are more than willing to help out with the solution, not just the problem that we have here in Pensacola, including Sean's Outpost and a few other people that I presume will be speaking today. I encourage you to join Councilwoman Myers in objecting to this vote and this expansion of the criminalization of citizens of our country.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. And I invite you
Thank
to
you.
strike down any further expansion of these ordinances. Thank you,
Thanks.
Council.
Appreciate it. Up next is Nathan Monk.
Members of the council, I would also like to object not only to an expansion of this ordinance, but of this ordinance in general. Criminalization of poverty is becoming an epidemic in Florida, and it is proving to be non-effective as a way of dealing with these issues. Not only does it cost our community 3 times as much to arrest someone for a poverty-related crime as it would to create practical solutions, but it also creates impediments to future employment and other opportunities for those we are attempting to get off of the street. It is my understanding that this panhandling ordinance is not currently being enforced, which I think is positive considering that the 4th District Court of Appeals recently knocked down a similar panhandling ordinance that was being used by a city in Virginia. I think that has now created real precedent, and other higher courts are beginning to follow suit, that this ordinance would not withstand legal challenge if it went forward. The big concern for me with all of this is that if we are challenged in a court, it's going to cost our community even more money that can be used towards creating solutions instead of criminalizing reactions by citizens who are homeless. We have a problem with homelessness in Pensacola. Arresting people for being poor is not the solution. There are practical solutions, such as the Housing First model, which is being used in other communities with tremendous success. Utah has reduced their homelessness by 80% and their visible homeless by almost 100%. New Orleans has housed 100% of their homeless veterans using a housing first model. We are operating in the dark ages with ordinances like this. My recommendation tonight, I've watched as many other add-ons have been added, as opposed to expanding this ordinance, I would suggest that an official, motion would be made to suspend any enforcement of this ordinance pending the city creating practical solutions so that people no longer have to panhandle in order to be able to survive, because it is the right thing to do, it is the progressive thing to do, and our city is making great advancements in other areas, and we need to get on track. Thank you.
Mr. Monk, 1 second. Ms. Myers, did you have a question?
I'll wait until after the public weighs in on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Monk. Next is Mr. Michael Kimbrell.
Good evening, Council. Michael Kimbrell, 801 East DeSoto Street. I would like to start off by thanking Councilwoman Myers and Mr. Brown for ruining my speech to start off, because they basically hit all the points that I was going to hit. So I'm just going to, just basically, instead of echoing all of them, I'm just going to say that I'm echoing all of them. And then I'm going to add in that there has been a lot of misconceptions about panhandling in this country. And not too long ago, the Union Square Business Improvement District, which consists of 500 property owners in downtown San Francisco, hired a company called GLS Research to survey panhandlers just to see what the statistical output of panhandling was. They found that almost half of them were African American, that over a quarter of them were veterans, that they averaged roughly $25 a day, and that 94% of that went to food. Now, I know that the consultant that you hired said that 90% went to drugs and alcohol, but the only person I've found that says that is that consultant. Like, all other homeless outreach studies say that 90+% goes to food, which makes sense. If you're trying to survive, that's where that needs to go, is towards survival. And also when questioned, 97% of them said they wanted housing, which also stands up behind the Housing First initiative. So also in the survey, they questioned the people that gave money to the panhandlers. And the number one reason that people gave money to panhandlers was because either they or a family member were very close to poverty and might need that same type of help one day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chase Sale.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the council. I'm Chase Solly. I was a member of the Task Force on Improving Human Services. I'd hope that you would consider the statement I'm about to make kind of a blanket statement over the next few agenda items that touch on the ordinances that we were specifically organized to discuss. I do want to have you consider, we were a member, an 11-member task force, very diverse in our careers, in our ages, in our ethnicity, and in our even our agendas. As a realtor in the community, I have a concern about keeping the integrity of the city of Pensacola intact. Others also would have, a humanitarian effort or agenda. In each of this, regardless of our differences, we all agreed on the 5 recommendations that I hope you have all looked over. As a matter of fact, all of the decisions, save for one, was unanimous. And so I would ask that you carry the, our recommendations with the weight that I feel that they deserve for our efforts of 6 months. I want you to know that we labored over this discussion. We brought up objections, we brought up solutions, and, much like your council meetings, there was intense debate, and at the end of the day, we all still came to the same conclusion. And specifically to this ordinance and our recommendation regarding panhandling, it was to repeal the ordinance, save for an exception of aggressive panhandling, and a full repeal of all other ordinances that would criminalize homelessness. All right, I just ask that you, again, consider the weight of our efforts, and I thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Cheryl Poyster.
Good evening. I am Cheryl Poyster, 1106 Dr. Martin Luther King Drive here in Pensacola. I did attend the task force meetings and paid close attention to what went forward and what was said. And as far as this ordinance and the one following, I do remember, and for very good reason, that the recommendation of the task force was to remove this ordinance and all other ordinances criminalizing homelessness. And I also agree with the other speakers, the Housing First initiative. I am a daughter, sister, and mother of veterans, and I am a strong supporter of those who have served our country and in many cases have found themselves at the bottom of society. We need to treat them with compassion and with decency. And I am asking you tonight to please repeal all ordinances as was recommended that criminalize homelessness, and certainly do not pass this one to exacerbate the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. John Johnson.
Since the task force has sunset, in the state of Florida, through the Department of Children and Families Office on Homelessness, our community, my organization, was successful in applying for a grant that 27 other continuums of care applied for. In that grant process, which was highly competitive, we came in second place in terms of need in that competition. And I was quite proud of the fact that we ranked higher than Miami. So we came in second place. With that funding, we were able to expand the emergency shelter capacity for loaves and fishes through a housing voucher program, which was one of the recommendations that Dr. Robert Marpa had, was to expand the emergency shelter capacity. So with that grant, as we speak, Loaves and Fishes is able to provide housing for families who are experiencing homelessness. Panhandling, even the nature of begging, is incredibly complicated. Homelessness is complicated. I spoke before this council and talked about how complicated homelessness is, how complex it is. There was a homeless guy that came into our office, a veteran, who had a sign professionally done. His goal was not to come to my organization to ask for money. What he did was he got his CDL driver's license. He wanted to get his out-of-state birth certificate, and through the result of those panhandling, he now has a job and he's moved on. And we're talking about a veteran. At the same time, I personally witnessed panhandlers go into a convenience store to buy beer. Again, homelessness is incredibly complicated, so I understand the nature of what we're doing and what we're trying to do in terms of moving people out of homelessness, trying to reduce the incidence and the appearance of panhandling. I understand that. But criminalizing it and arresting these citizens is not going to reduce homelessness. It is a response to a crisis need that has long-term effects that will not reduce homelessness. So what we're trying to do is an outreach campaign where we actually go out and outreach to those that are homeless. And I think that outreach campaign is far more effective in reducing homelessness than criminalizing it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mrs. Candlewood.
Yes, I just had a question about the panhandling part of it. They use panhandling and homelessness in the same vein. When we talk about panhandling, are all panhandlers homeless? Or the task force?
I don't think so.
The task force group?
No.
No, because I wanted to make sure we're talking about the panhandlers, the panhandling ordinance, but everyone has came up and they're using both. It is the same thing, in the same vein as being homeless.
I'm not sure.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson?
Is this Michael?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So your question was?
My question is we're talking about the panhandling ordinance now.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that when we're talking about the panhandling and the homeless, everyone has came up and they're using them both as the same.
Right.
Is it the same, or does data show that it is the same?
My research and data shows that just because someone is homeless doesn't necessarily make them a panhandler, and panhandlers are not necessarily homeless. In fact, I've witnessed people that actually did panhandling that were not homeless, that actually got in their vehicle and drove away. And so there is a percentage of those that are out there that are begging for money that dress down to give the populations.
Okay. The other one is you said that you got a grant to deal with homeless and housing for families.
Yes.
Was there any assistance for the veterans at this time?
Well,
The veteran population, I know you can have, it could cross over to families.
That's correct.
But that single veteran male or female person, has that population been addressed?
we definitely keep our eye on when it comes to homeless veterans. I'm quite proud of the fact that last year we had about an 18% homeless veteran population. I believe that that number is going to be significantly reduced because of the insurgence of VA vouchers and the partnership that we have with the city housing and the VA, as well as 90 Works. So I think the veterans population is going to go down quite significantly. But in this challenge grant funding, to address that particular question, it does not distinguish between a veteran or a homeless family. So anyone can receive services for that grant.
And Mr. President, the last question.
Go ahead.
The last question is, in the document from the task force, it speaks of aggressive panhandling. Did it define aggressive panhandling?
Did it define
Yes.
aggressive? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Okay. It defined what aggressive, so an
Yes.
ordinance that defined what aggressive panhandling is would be acceptable?
I'm in favor of having an ordinance for, I don't think someone should be pursued aggressively once they're asked and the person says no. And this is my own personal position on this, not as a representative of a homeless coalition, but in my own personal response to your question is, I don't think someone should be aggressively pursued once an individual has told that person no.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Ms. Myers?
Yes, I have several comments. First,
Wait, we have one more speaker.
oh, fine,
Okay.
no, let that person
Okay.
speak. I thought we were
The
finished.
last speaker is Alistair McKenzie.
Evening, council members. I wish I had had more time to prepare. Unfortunately, I was just informed about this a little while ago. It's nice to see you all again. Hope you all are well. Again, we're here about some homeless ordinances, and this one appears to be expanding one that's already on the books here, which still has not faced any sort of legal challenge in the city of Pensacola or Escambia County. Just in remembering a case I had read a few years back when someone had approached me and then decided not to challenge them. Hopefully they'll come back and see me again sometime. I remembered this case out of Jacksonville, and I just found it. There's also a Supreme Court of the United States case that clearly explicates that there's a First Amendment right to beg, and especially on public streets. And what you've already done, or the county already did, and y'all adopted basically, was a measure to, prevent what you call aggressive panhandling. Well, that's just a way to try and skirt around the issue, what's really going on, because if you're worried about the whole aggressive thing and someone being pursued, there's a whole host of other crimes that they can be arrested for. There's harassment, there's stalking, there's all kinds of other things that apply to that. But to tie it into the panhandling is to really get into an area where you're messing with someone's First Amendment rights, not to mention hurting the poor. The case for you guys, just so you have, if you want to go look it up on your own, is called CCB versus State. We have case sites in law, so anybody who wants to write these next jumbled words I'm about to say down are 458 SO period 2D 47. That's what's a first district case. The first district is this area of Florida. It goes all the way down to just above Gainesville, I think. It may include Gainesville. That's all binding law in this area. This is a good case, and what it says here is that a city ordinance which prohibited begging or soliciting alms in streets or public places of the city was unconstitutional, as it curbed a First Amendment right in a more intrusive manner than necessary. You cannot prohibit people from soliciting alms. It is a First Amendment right. Jim can attest to how long the Occupy case has tied up the city, how much money it's probably tied up in the city, and that's another thing that you have to keep in mind when going after these kinds of laws. So first, it's these people that are asking for the money are poor. Number two, you already have laws to deal with people who are being aggressive. Number three, it violates the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. Number four, it would be economically unfeasible for the city of Pensacola in this county to waste money incarcerating people for begging. And number five, it's economically infeasible for the city of Pensacola to defend a lawsuit that's brought and will be maintained for 4 years, I guess is what's Occupy's been going on, almost 5 years. And the suit will be brought whenever it could be, because people do have a First Amendment right to do this. So I'd implore you to please do away with this one, but also to do away with the other one. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Myers?
Well, I would like to point out that I was a legal aid attorney for many, many years, and all of my clients were poor. I represented many people who were incarcerated. They were all poor. And so I obviously am very, very much against laws that criminalize the poor. I believe that this ordinance has great constitutional issues. I do understand people's concerns about aggressive panhandling, but as Mr. McKenzie pointed out, there are other laws to deal with stalking, assault, battery, intimidation, harassment, laundering, and that kind of thing. And as someone said earlier, when you hire a consultant, let the consultant do their job. Well, we hired a consultant, plus we had a task force, but we're not listening. Instead, we've been sitting here for about 35, 40 minutes talking about adding one arterial intersection to this panhandling or solicitation ordinance, instead of talking about solutions for the issue of homelessness. And I find that troubling. I want to ask the President, Mr. President, at some point tonight, will you tell us when we're going to convene to talk about the solutions to homelessness and have Mr. Johnson and Molly Barrows? I talked with both of them last week about projects they're working on to address the issue of panhandling. I mean, they've got some ideas on how to address this issue. But instead of talking about that, we're talking about debating having this arterial intersection added to this ordinance. What I would suggest council do is forget about this. We have an attorney who's coming on board, who is from Miami, who knows a lot about homelessness, who knows a lot about constitutional law, who knows a whole lot about the Pottinger case. I had a fairly extensive conversation with her about these types of constitutional issues. I see absolutely no reason to go forward tonight and expand this ordinance to another arterial intersection. The only complaint I've gotten from anyone, and it was a member of the press last week who asked me, what is the City Council going to do about those people who are holding signs at that intersection and making it look bad for the city as people come across the bridge? Well, it's not the government's role to control how people look, unless they're maybe running around nude or something, you know, and that's not the case, you know. So I think what we need to do is have our president of the council decide when we're going to have a workshop, invite Mr. Johnson, invite Molly Barrows. They very much want to come and talk to us, and anybody else from the county and Santa Rosa County. I think we have some opportunities here possibly to get restore funds. I had a meeting last week, several meetings with Mr. Johnson and Molly Barrows to express some of my ideas about sources of funding for housing. So I'm just asking council to we don't need to do this. This isn't going to make any difference in anything except add another arterial road to this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Wood.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm going to preface my remarks with a few comments at the beginning because I don't want to be accused of being anti-poverty. And for the fellow council members that have heard this already, I beg your indulgence. For 5 years, I cooked at Loaves and Fishes once a week. I've had the privilege of ringing the bell for Salvation Army for over 17 years now. And I have been able to swing a hammer on 27 different Habitat for Humanity homes. So my remarks have absolutely nothing to do with homelessness. What I'm looking at is the police department has brought to us a public safety issue. And one of my biggest responsibilities as a sitting council member is the public safety and welfare of the citizens in this community. If you think of 17th and Bayou, we're really not talking about a small little windy road where you have very little traffic. So the dilemma that's going in my mind, public safety versus the right of homelessness to try to obtain funds. I have no problem, incidentally, with the repeal of the ordinance, and I want to thank the committee for their fine work. So I have no problem with repeal of the ones, you know, that y'all have talked about. But I am concerned about the public safety issue because the police department will not come to me and say this is a problem unless it is a problem. In the time that the ordinance has been on the book, to my knowledge, on the books, and to my knowledge, no one has been arrested, not a single citizen. But if you pass this, then you're able to see someone who's panhandling there and tell them it's against the law, please move on. Without that, there's nothing you can do, and if it becomes a detriment to traffic, what in the world do you do? So that's the dilemma I found myself in. Appreciate the remarks of all the speakers. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your concern for the poor, because they're the ones who have no voice, and without the ones who came to speak for them and others, no one represents them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on council? Yes, Mr. Spencer.
Thank you. I want to thank all members of the audience that have spoken, including someone that showed up in a rush last minute, Mr. McKenzie. So I want to seek some clarification from you, Mr. President, as sponsor of this. As I read the definition of panhandling, according, of course, to our ordinance, I see that panhandling means for purposes of this section only the same as soliciting, and then it describes soliciting and defines it. However, soliciting shall not include passively standing or sitting with a sign or other indication that one is seeking donations without addressing the request to the specific person.
That's correct.
So in that case, am I interpreting that correctly, that if someone is in that sort of passive stance at this arterial intersection, they are not in violation of this ordinance?
That's correct.
Okay.
You just can't approach and ask somebody for money.
The tension obviously occurs when you are dealing with someone on foot, a pedestrian, and then there is the difference of someone that is in their vehicle, and what that sort of interaction is like. Where does it cross the line between a sense of passivity for those involved as opposed to one that creates tension? And I certainly don't think we should condone that sort of event for people that are driving. But in listening to the presentations tonight and understanding that we have what hopefully the council will be approving, and that is a workshop. I also appreciate fellow Councilwoman Myers' insightful comments that we are poised to have a new city attorney with municipal experience in areas that experience this. I think we've got an opportunity to have some new perspectives that will augment certainly the results that we have from Dr. Marbutt. So I feel it's rather almost inconsequential, ineffective, and we're not really addressing the solutions that we need to embark on and study, the progressive ones, and therefore I am not going to be supporting adding this intersection.
Yep. Councilman Baer?
Thank you, Mr. President. We're agreeing a lot tonight. Councilman Spencer, I won't be supporting this either, and I came in here thinking it was a public safety issue, but I kept thinking about the item on our agenda which talks about having a meeting, having a workshop to consider the recommendations from the task force, and that's what I think really propels me to say, why would we do this now? If we're not even enforcing it anyway, why would we add yet another intersection? My only reservation is that, as someone who is keenly aware of transportation issues and I serve on 3 different boards related to transportation. I'm very concerned about pedestrians being hit by vehicles, and whether they're, homeless or not, just people in general. And I am concerned about some of these intersections. However, I do think we need to get this settled as far as what ordinances we're going to keep on the books. I did review the case that Mr. McKenzie spoke about. It looked like the Jacksonville ordinance was very, very broad. Ours is a little more specific, but still could be drawn a conclusion that we are violating constitutional rights. And so I'm not going to support this, and I encourage my fellow council members not to either. Thank you.
I see no other discussion, so we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Wait a minute. Councilman Wood. Motion fails 3-4.